Thank you very much for that very warm introduction. It's awesome to see such a turnout and so many students. Maybe there's some extra credit being offered for a class or two. I hope so, and don't worry, there's going to be more extra credit offered later in the talk, so please pay attention if you want to earn that. That is going to be extra credit for Professor Collison's class, so if you're in his class, you can get extra credit. All right, he didn't know about that till just now, but okay. So, so first, thank you very much, the organizers. It's excellent, and I'm very honored to be a part of this series. It's a great series. You may not know it, but a lot of the philosophers you've had out here to talk are just really phenomenal, and great papers come out of this series. So, also, I've had a wonderful time here, because this is your park, about 25 miles north of here. Do we have any disc golfers in here? No? You play? Yeah, all right. We do have a couple disc golfers. If you don't play disc golf, you have to start, because you have an amazing course, like 20 miles north of here in Evangel Park, which I played a round and a half this morning before having to go to lunch with Andy. So thank you very much. It's been a great time. So let me start by just situating my particular topic today within the context of a broader discussion that's been developing amongst epistemologists. So that broader discussion is over the importance of knowledge, and in particular, that discussion is over whether rationality at all depends on what you know. So recently, some philosophers who I like to think of as the champions of knowledge have been arguing that whether you're rational depends on what you know, and they've been arguing for this in different ways. So one way they've argued for this is to say that, look, whether you're rational, whether your beliefs are rational, depends on whether they're in accordance with the evidence, and, well, what is evidence? Evidence is just what you know. So that's known as the E equals K thesis. Evidence equals knowledge. Another way that people have tried to argue for the importance of knowledge is to say that, look, being rational means in part acting for reasons, but something can't be your reason unless you know it. So you can't go to the store for the reason that you're out of milk unless you know that you're out of milk, according to this view. Again, these are all controversial. But there's another way, a third way that people have been arguing for the importance of knowledge, and that is the way I'm going to be talking about here. So, yeah, so I think of this as the champions of knowledge versus the resistance. You know, it's not that we like hate knowledge or anything, so I'm part of the resistance. It's just like, it's not really so important, okay? There are other things that are more important in epistemology, a lot more important than knowledge, according to us. So, right, so I'm going to be talking about a particular battle within this sort of broader war over the importance of knowledge. And the particular battle concerns something that I call premising. And I mean, I'm sure you've heard the word, you know, if you're a philosophy student, you've definitely heard the word premise before. But let me just give an example to illustrate in particular what I mean by premising. So, we're going to take a horse race example. So, suppose you're at the races and this horse, Zenyatta is a real racehorse, but let's just call her Z for short. Suppose you have overwhelming evidence that Z will win the next race. You have so much evidence, in fact, that it's rational for you to believe that Z will win the next race, right? But as every good handicapper knows, that is, every good gambler knows, there can be cases in which it's rational to believe that Z will win, but because the payout is so low, it wouldn't be rational to bet that Z will win. So it's rational to believe that Z will win, but because, let's suppose, you know, in order to win a dime, you've got to risk $100 or something like that. In a case like that, it's not going to be rational to bet that Z will win, but it is rational to believe that Z will win. All right, so that's our setup. Now we have these people at the racetrack, and they're at the betting window here, and they're deciding whether they're going to bet. They're thinking about the situation. They're thinking about betting on Z. So the lady on the left, we're going to call her Mike, because her name's Mike on the handout. So Mike believes that Z will win, and she also decides to bet on Z. So believing that Z will win, that's what she should be doing. That's rational, but betting on Z, that's not rational. So in a case like that, I'm going to say that the person makes a practical mistake. And I want to contrast that with a case like, I think his name is John on the handout. So John here believes that Z won't win, and he also doesn't bet on Z. So he performs the right action not betting on Z, but he's got the wrong belief. He believes that Z won't win, when he should be believing that that she should win, or that she will win. So in a case like that, he performs the right act, so he doesn't make a practical mistake. Oh, sorry, I have it backwards, don't I? I've been saying it backwards. She makes the, no, I know I had it right. Yeah, sorry, I had it right. She makes the practical mistake, but not the belief mistake. So he performs the right act, so he doesn't make a practical mistake, but he believes that Z won't win when he should be believing that she will win. So he makes what I call a doxastic mistake. So we have a doxastic mistake versus a practical mistake. Now I want you to consider Susie here in the middle. So Susie's just like Mike. Susie believes that Z will win and bets on Z. So she's got the right belief. She doesn't make a doxastic mistake. She does make a practical mistake. So you might think the case is just like Mike's. But let's think a little bit more about the reasoning that goes on that Susie performs when deciding to bet on Z. And I want to say that in addition to performing the wrong act, she also makes a mistake in her reasoning. Right? So she thinks to herself, Z will win. If Z will win, then betting on Z is optimal. It's the best thing to do. So I will bet on Z. So I suggest that in a case like this, she doesn't just perform the wrong action. She doesn't just make a practical mistake. She also makes a mistake in her reasoning, and in particular, she makes a mistake when she just flat out assumes that Z will win. Although it's rational for her to believe that Z will win, she shouldn't just take that as given in her reasoning. What she should be doing is thinking probabilistically, thinking about the probability that Z will win, and thinking about the payout, right? So in a case like this, I'm going to say that the agent makes a premising mistake. She premises something that she shouldn't premise, even though it's okay for her to believe it. So notice that it's not always a mistake to premise. So here's Mitt Romney looking out the window of his private jet, and he sees that it's raining. And so he thinks to himself, it's raining. Well, if it's raining, then the best thing to do is take an umbrella, so I'll take an umbrella. He's looking at the rain. It doesn't seem like there's anything wrong with this piece of reasoning. It doesn't seem like Mitt's being irrational for not thinking, well, see, I could be a brain in vat, so it's not 100% sure. The 99.999, right? No. In a case like this, it's perfectly fine to just premise that it's raining. So it's not always a mistake to premise, and sometimes it is. And what I want to know is, the subject for our talk today, for my talk, is when is it rationally permissible to premise and when not? So that's what I call the premising question. So before addressing the question, I want to just sort of position this question in relation to some more traditional work in ethics. So this is a question that epistemologists have been talking quite a lot about recently, and some ethicists have started wondering, well, how does that work over in epistemology connect up to work we've been doing in in ethics, because we talk about reasons and rationality all the time. So here's a little background. If you were here yesterday for the talk, you'll recognize Kant's shopkeeper. So we have a shopkeeper. In both cases, the shopkeeper is going to give everybody a fair price. But in one case, he does it because he thinks it's the morally right thing to do. And in the other case, he does it because he thinks it's good business. So in this kind of case, we have someone who has different motivating reasons. So his motivating reason for doing it is because he thinks it's morally right. His motivating reason for doing it is because he thinks it's good business. But Kant would say they have the same normative reasons to give everyone the same price. And what a normative reason is a reason that speaks in favor of doing something. Roughly put, a normative reason is a reason that speaks in favor of doing it. A motivating reason is the reason, whatever it is, good or bad, for which the agent acted. So Kant would say, look, in both cases, the shopkeeper has the same normative reason to give everyone a fair price. Namely, that it's the morally right thing to do. But Kant would say they have different motivating reasons, because what in fact motivated the one was not a consideration about what it's morally right to do, but a consideration about what it's good business to do. So both of these kinds of reasons are relevant to rationality, because rationality involves not just doing what you have most normative reason to do, but also doing it for good motivating reasons. So Kant would say, look, this guy, although he does what he has most normative reason to do, he doesn't do it for good motivating reasons, and so he's still rationally criticizable. He suffers a failure of rationality. So one thing we want to know is, well, what's the relationship, what does it mean to act for good motivating reasons? And on the standard view, to act for good motivating reasons is to act for motivating reasons that are normative reasons. So in that view, he acts for a good motivating reason He doesn't, because his motivating reason is the normative reason, whereas his isn't. So if that's what it is to act for a good motivating reason, then I think it should be pretty clear that rationality involves even more than acting for good motivating reasons. Because after all, consider Susie, right? So Susie thinks Z will win. If Z will win, then betting on Z is the optimal thing to do, so I'll bet on Z. Her reason, right, for betting is that Z will win. And the fact that Z will win is a normative reason to bet on Z. It's something that speaks in favor of betting on Z. So her motivating reason is a normative reason, and so in that sense she acts for a good reason, right? But we still said she's in some sense rationally criticizable. The sense in which she's rationally criticizable is that although the reason for which she acts is a good reason, her sort of epistemic position with respect to the fact that Z will win isn't strong enough to make it rationally permissible to, so to speak, act on the basis of that reason, or as I said, to premise that Z will win in her reasoning. So the question then becomes, what kind of epistemic position does one have to stand in to the relevant proposition in order to not be rationally criticizable? So all of this is just a very long way of saying that I think the premising question is a question that's supplemental to questions that ethicists have traditionally been arguing about. It's a sort of new question. Okay, right, she makes a premising mistake. So, all right, so the premising question. When is it rational to premise? According to the knowledge view, if you're a champion of knowledge on this question, you're going to say it's rational to premise that P if and only if you know that P. The other sort of main camp is the justification view, which says it's rational to premise that P if and only if you're justified in believing that P. Unfortunately, there are reasons to want to resist either of these views. There's good reasons to reject both of those views. So against the knowledge view, we have counterexamples. So if you're a member of Professor Cullison's epistemology class, you've done Gettier cases? All right, great. So think about a typical Gettier case. So my favorite one is the sort of broken clock case. So suppose John has been in a coma for weeks. He wakes up, he sees a clock next to his hospital bed. The clock reads 5 a.m., but the clock's been broken, unbeknownst to him. The clock's been broken for several days or maybe even weeks, and it just so happens to be 5 a.m. So he just happens, by pure coincidence, to wake up at the one moment out of each 24 hours when that clock reads the right time, right? So in a case like that, he's got a justified true belief that it's 5 a.m., but intuitively he doesn't know that it's 5 a.m. He just got lucky. It's a sort of standard diagnosis of the case. But yet, so he doesn't know that it's 5 a.m., but suppose he says, he looks at the clock and says, oh, it's 5 a.m. Well, the nurses will be around soon to check on the patients anyway, so I won't bother to buzz them or something. There he premises that it's 5 a.m. Doesn't seem to be anything irrational about premising that it's 5 a.m., and yet he doesn't know that it's 5 a.m. So that's some reason to doubt the knowledge view. You can run similar cases that suggest that truth isn't important as well. So you don't even have to have a true belief in order for it to be rationally permissible. But in the interest of time, I'm going to move on. Unfortunately, the justification view also faces counterexamples. We've already seen one. So Susie at the racetrack, she's got a justified belief that Z will win, but it's intuitively not rationally permissible for her to premise that Z will win. Another reason, sort of indirectly against the justification view and directly in favor of the knowledge view, is just facts about our ordinary language discourse. We often criticize someone for doing what they did, or more precisely, for acting on the basis of the belief that they act on, by pointing out that that belief didn't amount to knowledge. So we say, well, why did, so like Hawthorne Stanley's case is, well, why did you turn left, down that street? You didn't know that the restaurant was down there. It's a very natural thing to say, and it sort of stands in need of explanation. If it's true that justification and not knowledge is the sort of deciding factor on when you should premise, then it's sort of, we'd like an explanation of why it is that we're always criticizing people in terms of knowledge and not justification. So here's just a nice little example from Star Trek of someone making this kind of criticism in ordinary language, well, ordinary discourse, ordinary Star Trek discourse. Yep.
You took a big chance.
Did I, Mr. Spock? They had been killing 3 million people a year. It had been going on for 500 years. An actual attack wouldn't have killed any more people than one of their computer attacks, but it would have ended their ability to make war. The fighting would have been over, permanently.
But you didn't know that it would work.
Oh, very dramatic. Okay, very dramatic criticism. You didn't know. I owe someone a thanks for tipping me off to this clip. I don't know. I can't remember. Someone on Facebook. So you know who you are. Whoever. Thanks to. Okay. Right. Okay. So there's a sort of situation. We've got the knowledge view and the justification view. We've got reasons that go against each. Right. So I guess Hegelians will be familiar. They'll know what's coming next. We have thesis, antithesis, synthesis. So we get a hybrid view, which has been argued for by Ron Netta and Declan Smithies, which says what matters is not whether you know or whether you're justified in believing, but whether you're justified in believing that you know. So that kind of view does pretty well with the cases that we've considered so far. So just consider Susie at the racetrack. It's pretty plausible that she's not justified in believing that she knows that Z will win, and indeed, she's not rational principle for her to premise. So that view seems to get the case right. The problem is that this view too. I promise I'll get to like the right view pretty soon, but we got to see what's wrong with all the others first. So this view faces counterexamples. So in the 2008 paper, Jessica Brown invented a case she calls surgeon. She used it as a counterexample to the knowledge view, but we can also use it as a counterexample to the hybrid view and also the justification view. So here's the case. So a student has been observing a surgeon all day. The surgeon has been talking to a patient about the patient's diseased left kidney, which needs to be removed in the afternoon. So they've been talking all day about your left kidney this, your left kidney that, right? And then, okay, so now it's in the afternoon, the surgery is about to happen, and just before the surgeon starts to perform the surgery, she double checks the patient's records. And now the student observing this turns to a nurse and says, why is she double checking the patient's record? Doesn't she know that it's the left kidney that needs to be diseased? That needs to be removed because it's diseased? And the nurse replies, well, of course she knows it's the left kidney that's diseased, but it still makes sense to double check. It just wouldn't be worth it to take that kind of a risk, because after all, how terrible would it be if they removed the one good kidney? In a case like that, it seems like the surgeon is justified in believing that the left kidney is diseased, knows that the left kidney is diseased, and is justified in believing that she knows the left kidney is diseased, and yet it wouldn't be rationally permissible for her to just think, well, the left kidney is diseased, so I'll remove that one, without double checking first. Right? So again, we have a counterexample to all these views. So Brown's case is particularly excellent because not only is it a counterexample to all those views, but it's sort of instructive counterexample in that it highlights the fact that what matters is not just your, so to speak, epistemic position with respect to the proposition, but what also matters is what's at stake. What's at stake, how high the stakes are, how lopsided the stakes are, and so on. So of course, proponents of these other views are aware of this. They're not fools, they're not complete fools. They're aware of this, and so what they try to do is they say, look, yeah, I get it. The permissibility of premising depends on what's at stake, but that's because whether you're justified in believing depends on what's at stake, or whether you know depends on what's at stake, or whether you're justified in believing that you know depends on what's at stake. So they're going to say, yes, stakes are important, but stakes are important via the role they play in determining what you know or what you're justified in believing. That idea is called pragmatic encroachment. I actually think that in this context, the pragmatic encroachment defense seems rather question-begging, because after all, Brown's surgeon case is just as much a counterexample to the pragmatic encroachment thesis as it is to these original views. So the pragmatic encroachment view, in order to successfully defend these principles, is going to have to say that, look, if it's not rationally permissible to premise, then you don't know. But Brown's surgeon case, again, seems intuitively like a case where it isn't rationally permissible to premise, and yet you do know. So if you're not convinced by that case, here's an even stronger case. This is a slight variation of another case that Brown gives. So suppose, yeah, what's your name?
Oh, Rob.
Rob? Rob. Okay, Rob, where were you born?
In Jamestown, New York.
Jamestown. Okay, Jamestown. Are you sure?
I'm fairly certain.
Okay, fairly certain.
I'm a skeptic, so.
Oh, you're skeptic. Oh, I need someone who's not a skeptic. You're not a skeptic? Okay, good. Where were you born?
Buffalo.
Buffalo. Okay, so I'm going to offer you the following bet. If you really were born in, well, I don't know.
Mercy Hospital.
What's that? No, okay, we don't need to get that specific. Buffalo. No, I like Mercy Hospitals. You can do that. Mercy Hospital. If you really were born in Mercy Hospital, we're going to go check some records, and we're going to check very deeply. And if you're right, you're going to get a quarter. But if you're wrong, I'm going to put you on the rack, the torture rack for the next 30 years. Do you think it's rational for you to take this bet?
No.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I'm really glad you said that, because that would have been really difficult to talk about that one. Yeah, okay, good. So you share my intuition about that case. Lots of people share this intuition. It's not rationally permissible to take this bet, and that means it's not rationally permissible for you to reason as follows. I was born at Mercy Hospital, therefore, betting on, taking the bet will mean that I'll get a quarter. It's not rationally permissible for you to reason that way, and that's despite the fact that you know you were born in Mercy Hospital, you're justified in believing that you were born in Mercy Hospital, and you're justified in believing that you know you're born in Mercy Hospital. So again, I think it's a counterexample. So what we want is a principle that is sensitive not only to epistemic position, but also to stakes independently of that. And so here's finally the truth, the right view, the practical, what I call the practical certainty principle. So according to the practical certainty principle, it's rationally permissible to premise P for an agent S relative to a decision D, if and only if the action which the agent actually has most reason to do, given the actual epistemic probability that P, is the same action that the agent would have most reason to do were it epistemically certain that P. So, okay, that's a rather technical definition, but just think of it this way. If the difference between the actual probability that P and absolute certainty that P isn't a difference that makes a difference to what it's rational to do, then it's rationally permissible to premise. If it is a difference that makes a difference to what it's rational to do, then it's not rational to premise. All right, so if you're... actually, let me make sure I'm not skipping. Right. So if you're keeping score, we've considered several cases. Just handy little chart here about which principles get which cases right and which one's wrong, and of course, I was trying to sell you this principle, so we've got a lot of green checks over here. So I'll just run through a couple of them. We won't go through all of them, but just take the horse racing one from the beginning, Susie. So it's very, very likely that Z will win. The epistemic probability of Z's winning is very, very high. High enough to justify Susie in believing that Z will win, but it's not high enough to make betting on Z the rational thing to do. But were it absolutely epistemically certain that Z would win, then betting on Z would be the rational thing to do. So the difference between the actual epistemic probability and absolute certainty is a difference that makes a difference, and so the practical certainty principle says not rational to premise. And indeed, that's the intuitively correct judgment about the case, so we get a green check. Surgeon is a case, surgeon and birth location work similarly. Let's do Gettier. So in the Gettier case, you see there are John sees the clock says it's 5 a.m. It's not absolutely certain that it's 5 a.m., but the epistemic probability it's 5 a.m. is very high, and it's high enough to make waiting for the nurses without ringing the bell the rational thing to do, and that is the same thing that would be rational were it absolutely certain that it was 5 a.m. So it's not a difference that makes a difference, and so the principle says it's okay to premise, and indeed that's the intuitively correct judgment about the case. Okay. So, all right. So here's where we're at. So. The practical certainty principle is a sort of sophisticated version of the justification view. Because the way I'm understanding epistemic probability is that the epistemic probability that P is the degree of credence that P that you're justified in having. So it's a sophisticated version of the justification-based view, and it handles these cases that were counterexamples for the sort of simple version of the justification-based view and the hybrid version. So the other thing to do then is to show that we can offer a sort of explanation of why it is that we criticize people in terms of knowledge, even though degree of justification is the norm of premising and not knowledge. So the basic defense is the basic explanation is one that's been offered before, and it's to give an explanation in terms of what knowledge ascriptions or denials pragmatically or conversationally implicate. So the idea is that when you say that someone knows that P, you're pragmatically implicating, you're communicating in the conversation that it's rationally permissible for that person to premise that P, even though you're not saying as much, nor are you saying anything that entails that. Okay, so that's the basic kind of view. Let me walk through that a little bit more slowly. So actually, yeah, so I mentioned earlier I played disc golf this morning, and I got a great example of conversational implicature. So so some of you are familiar with the idea of conversational implicature. I'm guessing a lot of you aren't. Here's a sort of good example. So at this, what's the park called? Evangola. Yeah, Evangola Park. They have like 3 bathrooms, like pretty close to each other. There's a building there, and a building there. 3 bathrooms, right? And I go to each one, and they're locked. All of them are locked. And I don't know what's going on. It's like no one running the park, right? I guess because none of these bathrooms are open. Fortunately, it was not an emergency situation, but I would like to use the bathroom. And so I asked somebody, someone that worked at the park, it clearly worked at the park, hey, is there a bathroom in this park? And he said, yeah, there's 3, right here. And I said, well, yeah, but they're all closed. He's like, oh, yeah, they're all locked. And I was like, okay, look, this is not the information I was looking for, right? So, look, he said, what he strictly speaking said, there are 3 bathrooms in the park, was true. But what he communicated by saying that was that these bathrooms were open, and that's false. So what he said, what he literally said was that there's bathrooms. What he communicated is that there's open bathrooms. So here he's communicating something that he's not saying. And that's what I think happens when we say that people know stuff or we say that people don't know stuff. So notice, he could have said, no, there aren't any bathrooms, right? And although this would have been false, it would have communicated the correct information, the right information. It would have communicated the information that it wanted and something that was true, right? Which is that there aren't any open bathrooms. Or more specifically, there's no bathrooms available to me, right? Okay, so that's the sort of general idea of conversational implicature. And now, again, I want to argue that a knowledge ascription will implicate that this is a choice situation in which it's rationally permissible for S to premise that P. All right, so how does that work? Well, I'm not going to walk through the details here, but as I argue in another paper, well, first, something everybody takes for granted is that, lots of people take for granted, is that knowledge requires justified belief. And then, as I argue in another paper, to believe is in part to be disposed to premise in at least some choice situations. So that means that if you say that someone knows that P, part of what you're literally saying is that there is at least one choice situation in which it's rationally permissible for S to premise that P. That's part of what you're actually saying. And that, I claim, is going to pragmatically implicate, it's going to conversationally implicate, that this is such a choice situation. So consider this example. So we're at a party, and my sister Bridget walks in, and she's got a cast on her arm, right? And you and I both know that she was recently on a ski trip, right? So we know that she was on a ski trip, and then we know that she's got this cast on her arm. And you ask me, hey, did Bridget get injured on her ski trip? And I say, yeah, she got injured, right? Now look, what I've said is that Bridget was injured on her ski trip, and that entails that there's at least one injury such that Bridget received it on her ski trip. But it clearly implicates that this injury that's salient in the conversation, is such an injury, is an injury that Bridget received on her trip. So I want to say that analogous thing is going on here. When you say that someone knows that P, part of what you're saying is that there's at least one choice situation which is rationally permissible to premise that P, and since there's one particular choice situation that's salient in the conversation, namely the one that the agent is currently in, this is typically going to implicate that that this is such a choice situation. Okay. Let's see. Oh, right. Okay. So last thing. Yeah, I've kept this pretty short. Yeah, good. Short philosophy talks are great. Lots of time for discussion. That's what we want. And I hope that lots of you will just like tear into me, please. Okay, so we have one more horse racing example. I'm going to use this to deal with a potential, or what you might think is a counterexample to the practical certainty principle. So, well, first of all, what's going on here? This isn't two horse races. This is the race, and this is a close-up down here. It's a split screen. This is a close-up on these couple horses there. Okay. So, all right. So this is a race that happened a couple weeks ago, I think. Andy?
Yep.
A couple weeks ago. So Professor Cullison was at this race. This is a Kentucky Derby qualifying race at Keeneland, which is in Kentucky. Not at Churchill Downs where the Derby is, but it's a qualifying race for the Kentucky Derby. And Professor Cullison was there, and he's betting on a horse in this race. I'm not going to tell you which one. Not yet. Okay, who thinks, but wait, so if you're, this is the part where you get to earn extra credit. If you're in, who's in Professor Cullison's epistemology class? Oh, all right, got a good number. Okay, who thinks, like, raise your hand if you think that Professor Cullison's horse wins this race. They're about 2/3 of the way through it right now. Raise your hand if you think his horse wins this race. Raise your hand if you think he doesn't win this race. The horse doesn't win this race. You can just guess either way. Doesn't win. Okay, wow. They have no confidence in you. So, almost everyone believes it doesn't win. Okay, that's always, yeah. For any given horse, it's always smart to bet that that horse won't win. I mean, just as like, to believe that. Okay, well, no, actually that comes from it. Okay, forget what I just said. I shouldn't joke on the fly. All right, so all my jokes should be pre-scripted. Okay, so here's the deal. If you're in Professor Cullison's epistemology class, here's the deal. You can't bet that his horse is going to lose. But you can bet, you can either do nothing or you can bet that his horse is going to win. All right? And if you bet that his horse is going to win, and you're right, then you're going to get some extra credit. You have a final exam or a final paper?
Both.
Both. Okay. Which one's worth more?
Final paper.
Okay, you're going to get some extra credit in your final paper. You're going to get a little bit of extra credit if you're right about this. And you say, well, you don't have the power to do this. I do have the power to do this because he owes me one, so I'm going to talk him into this after a couple beers tonight. So, so he owes me this. You'll get extra credit. So if you bet that his horse wins, and he does win, you get the extra credit. If you bet that his horse wins, and he doesn't win, nothing. It doesn't cost you anything. No risk. No strings attached. All right? I know you're thinking there's some kind of catch. There's no catch. So you can either not bet, or you can bet that he'll win, in which case, if he does, you get extra credit. So who wants to take the deal? Is that everyone? About everyone? Is there anyone who's not taking the deal? That's because you need to remember which ones took the deal. No one wants to not. Okay, everyone's taking the deal. Okay, all right, good. Okay, I've got some bad news. They're about 2/3 of the way through the race. This is Professor Cullison's horse. Number 4, he's got a white jersey and it's a yellow cap or white cap. I'm not sure, but anyway, it's a white jersey. Number 4. His name is Java's War. Java's War. So here we go.
Third up on the outside, Palace Malice finds an opening toward the rail, and Palace Malice from 4th to 2nd, but 3 lengths off the lead of Bridal Luke. Uncaptured needs to find more and find it quickly. Undrafted drops back and forth. Charming Kitten is trying to get on track with Java's War on the far outside, but a long way to come. Here's Palace Malice coming after Bridal Luke. They're at the 8th pole. Java's War and Charming Kitten and Malice the Books all running late, but Palace Malice the closest threat to Bridal Luke. Java's War is still coming. So is Charming Kitten. Java's War chasing Palace Malice. Java's War.
Congratulations. I thought we get more cheering. I mean, you're getting extra credit. Okay, so congratulations. You've all just got a little bit extra credit. Of course, Professor Coulson grades on the curve, so that all just washes out. But all right. So look. So the reason I use this case. So consider your decision, the decision that you had to make. Do I take the deal or do I not take the deal? It's obviously rational to take the deal. right? No matter how low the epistemic probability, because there was nothing to lose, it was rational to take the deal. But suppose it were certain that his horse was going to win. It would still be rational to take the deal, obviously. So here's a case where no matter how low the epistemic probability is, what it's rationally permissible to do is the same thing that would be rationally permissible were the thing certain. So according to my definition, that's a case in which the proposition, in this case the proposition that Java's war will win, is practically certain, and therefore, according to my principle, it's rationally permissible. It would have been rationally permissible for you to premise that Professor Collison's horse would win. So my principle says that it would have been rationally permissible for you to think, well, Professor Collison's horse will win, and if he wins, then the best thing to do is to bet that he'll win, and so you bet that he'll win. So you might think that sort of seems like a counterexample to my view, because clearly it doesn't seem like that's the right kind of reasoning to be engaging in that situation. So here's what I want to say about this kind of case. I want to say that what's going on here is that there is something that's rationally impermissible. What would be rationally impermissible is for you to believe that Professor Collison's horse was going to win. But there's nothing additionally rationally impermissible about premising that Professor Collison's horse is going to win. So it's wrong to believe, but there's nothing additionally wrong about premising. Okay, and that's that. Oh, and as far as the extra credit goes, I told you that Professor Collison owes me one, and this is why. This is a text that he sent me the morning before that race. And this is my response. So, yeah, you'll get your extra credit. Okay, that's all. Thanks.